Good morning and welcome to Adrenalin Thought Leadership webinar series. Um, I hope all of you are staying safe and um, staying at home, going to work safely. So I'd like to introduce to you why we do this Thought Leadership webinar series. Adrenalin E-Systems Limited, we pride itself on being the leader in the HR tech space. The past year has shown the increasingly important role that HR is playing as a function and also becoming an integral player in business strategy and decisions. And we're all about having conversations around this new role play. So, to this effect, Adrenalin hosts thought leadership webinars where we invite stalwarts to share their thoughts and working models on current trends, which will greatly benefit not only the community but also organizations. Today, we have with us Mr. Anil Sachdev, the founder and chairman of the Soil Institute of Management, to share his views on a much needed topic for the present times, particularly in the L&D space: how to source learning agility for organizational transformation. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
How are you, sir, today?
I'm very good. Thank you very much. I'm back in my campus after a long time, so I'm enjoying. We've started this hybrid classes in campus. There are some students here, some of my colleagues here. So very nice to actually go back to a new world, after some time.
That's nice. So today, Mr. Sachdev will explore the dimensions of learning agility. That's mental agility, people agility, adaptability, childlike curiosity to learn, self-awareness, and resourcefulness. Mr. Sachdev will also leverage his long career of assisting large and complex organizations in sharing insights about how businesses are learning in the new world and preparing for the future. He will also share examples of how these organizations are developing learning agility to adapt and transform by sourcing empathy, innovation, and resilience to serve the well being of all stakeholders with purpose. So, attendees, before we begin this session, if you have any questions along the way, kindly type them out in the questions or the chat window in your right panel, and we will address it towards the end of the session. Since this is more about the L&D space, and we'd like to know the kind of audience that we have today, because that way we will be able to take this session forward in a manner that will benefit all of us. So we're going to warm up with a few poll questions. A screen will flash in front of you, and you can just choose the options. This is just to know what kind of audience we have with us today, right? So let's get started. Yes. I'm just going to leave this screen for about 30 seconds so you can answer.
So Esarella, is the poll over? Esarella, is the poll over? Esarella?
All right. So we have about 78% HR professionals and 10% in the business technology side of business and 10% of academicians who are here. And
Any other attributes?
okay, so we'd like to know how young you are. This is just to know.
Yeah, Azraela, since this is taking more time, I think this is enough. This is enough as a question to begin with, and later on we can do more. Since it is taking more time, I think we should move on with the webinar. Okay. All right.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to this time and space. Please call me Anil, and it's wonderful to get to know you this way through this wonderful platform given to us by Adrenalin. You know, the subject is really all about sourcing, learning, agility for organizational transformation. And I'll just, you know, like it happened to us last year when all of a sudden we were just into this sudden lockdown. You know, it kind of the speed with which COVID descended into our lives and the immediate reaction of the governments in many parts of the world, including India, to just lock everything was quite astonishing to see. It was very, it was almost unbelievable to see 1.3 billion people being locked in India, and to see the discipline with which everybody decided to stay home and did not come out was quite unique. And then all of us responded in unique ways. You know, for me, who had done the occasional Zoom call, the speed with which I saw myself learning technology, getting skillful in using all the digital formats, learning on the fly because we had no time. And for us to see the way all our, you know, there are a large number of our organizations, several hundred students, faculty, staff, clients, to see the speed with which we were all adapting. And at the same time, there was fear. So it was quite astonishing that I didn't even know that I was capable of doing many things as a colleague, as a leader, as a family member, which actually began to happen. And right through this whole period, including my, you know, my tryst with the COVID, when I and my wife were diagnosed with COVID, and I had this very difficult period to deal with a lung infection on steroids, not wondering about anything, but just being there and just hoping for the best. So all kinds of things happened. And I was asking myself, what enabled us to really be at our best? And last year we decided that amongst the most important priorities for us in our entire masters in leadership studies that we do, the business management program we run, and also all our programs for executive education, including our global leadership program, in which several people from intellect design that is associated with Adrenalin also participated. We decided to make learning agility a focal for all of us. And the original research on learning agility, if you remember, was exactly 10 years back. It was published by this wonderful group of researchers. And they said that every time we source from within, our own power of observing ourselves and our context, and we are with our whole minds, our full presence, when we are learning from our experience in the new situations that descend upon us, that really is what learning agility is all about. That means when experience happens to us and there is complexity, challenge, new experiences, when we begin to see a pattern, when we begin to make sense out of them, and that helps us to perform better, and we raise our games and we learn quickly, we learn new skills and add that to our repertoire. And so we realize that people who are more learning agile, all of us, we have more lessons, more insights, more tools, more solutions to draw upon when we face these challenges. And clearly I could see amongst our students, faculty, clients, all the large organizations we are associated with, some people were truly agile learners. Some people were not able to handle the fear and insecurity, especially in the second wave when we lost many near and dear ones. It was so difficult for people to deal with those solutions. So I want to present here that almost at the same time that the original research on learning agility was published, we were invited by the Mahindra Group 10 years back to help them on a very interesting new initiative called RISE. And this example of RISE is a great example of how learning agility was sourced by this wonderful organization led by an amazing leader called Anil Mahindra. And this presentation is done by Prince Augustine, their executive VP for Group Human Capital, which is being presented to you. So what actually is the Mahindra story, which is a great example? There was a need to change. And why? Because at that time, 10 years back, Mahindra was into different sectors. It had made a strong presence in technology sector through Tech Mahindra. It had a large automobile business. It was also running Mahindra Resorts, Mahindra Finance. It had also bought over a Korean company. So it was becoming more global. And truly, that word VUCA was coming alive in the hearts and minds of every Mahindra leader. So at that time, there was this reinvention of the company which had begun to happen, which they were calling tomorrow's company. And they had this 10-year journey in mind, which is 2021. And of course, last 18 months, that journey has been hugely impacted by COVID. But thanks to the RISE spirit, the way Mahindra has responded to COVID, the way they have done amazing things in the last 18 months to take on the challenges, including taking tough calls on businesses, and yet dealing with people with extreme compassion, is a wonderful aspect. Because when they did this 10 years back, their own perception when they understood was that even though they were trying to be very innovative and great agile learners, the world was perceiving them as middle-aged people who were more about their rural background because of their tractor business. They're the largest tractor company in the world. And they were perceived by many people to be conventional and risk-averse, almost being mistaken for a public sector undertaking. So that time, just before they did this initiative and before the research on learning agility came up, the question that everybody was asking is, how do we take the next leap? They invited an organization in Madison Avenue in New York called Strawberry Frog, which is a branding organization, because they wanted to enter the US market. And this organization told them before they agreed to be their consultants, they would like to come and spend a lot of time with them in India, talk to the people, talk to dealers, stockists, partners, and truly understand what was the spirit of Mahindra that was being talked about. And so they understood that there were common cultural elements. What was emerging in the company after interviewing and meeting a large number of people, these people understood that there was an emergence of a global mindset. There was a spirit to challenge the status quo. There was a lot of ingenuity. And also people were really conscious of their social responsibility. Mahindra was one of the first to introduce employee social option programs, ESOPs with a different twist, where employees could take company time out to go and volunteer to serve in the social sector. So these were all great examples. What was enduring was this whole culture of empowerment, honoring diversity, being highly transparent and demonstrating integrity at every step, and being truly compassionate to all stakeholders. And what was declining, which was the Mahindra of the past, was that they were declining the cautious nature, the more civil service kind of mentality, more insular, not being aware of what's happening in the rest of the world, and more short-term thinking. So therefore, they believed there was a new language that was being born, that was freeing their mind up. And they gave three names to this language. One, accept no limits. Two, do alternate thinking. And third, drive positive change. And these three paths became the part of the new transformation and culture and ways of doing things that the organization introduced. So the three pillars of RISE, or accept no limits, alternate thinking, and drive positive change. What will we do? Accept no limits in terms of the power of our vision to be able to think big things, 10x thinking as it was called. How would they do it? By really making the culture of innovation come alive through alternate thinking. And why were they asking this from themselves to be done? They really wanted to make a difference in the lives of their stakeholders, which was the larger purpose that was inspiring them. And so these were the significant areas of the culture that had come alive. And the organization was beginning to wake up to the possibilities. As a result of this, we helped the Mahindra Group, and we were involved with helping them to articulate the new language. There were senior leadership workshops that were done. I had the good fortune of being part of this whole process. And the whole aspect was to begin to have a conversation and a dialogue around the new language, talk about the new spirit that was being created, and the whole process was to be co-created. And so all the business leaders were involved, and they began to look at how to transform every single process that had a big impact on customer experience and a big impact on people experience for employee experience. And so big ideas were chosen for that. Communication forums were created. A lot of new work was done on customer centricity. A new method of recognizing and rewarding people was put. Brand ambassadors were put into place. And new focus on capability building with this new culture was put into place. Here is an example, for example, Anand Mahindra, and there I am sitting next to him, looking at my phone, sending messages to Prince about what's the next step in the workshop that we are doing. And and there is behind me on the left side, Ruspe Irani, who's now the group head of human resources and other things. At that time, it was Rajiv Dubey, who's now an advisor to the Mahindra Group. So a very beautiful whole process was done in empowering people and creating excitement around work, making the work more enjoyable, and also making sure we check by doing behavioral audits through 360 process and things like that. Now, what is this Mahindra story all about? You see, there are 6 elements to learning agility, and I have taken the liberty to somewhat modify the original model that was published on learning agility. One thing I understood through our example and work with Mahindra and indeed with many other companies, that the heart lies this ability to be childlike. You see, when we get older, we lose this curiosity. We are not able to look at the world with a fresh pair of eyes like children do. So at the heart of learning agility, which organizations need to inculcate in the culture for transformation, is that curiosity to learn, which is the one which will make us go out of the comfort zone and say, is that so? Is that so? You know, that excitement that every day is a new beginning. The second part is this whole thing about self-awareness. See, when Strawberry Frog came to them and said, you know what, you are speaking a new language. Here are the examples that we have discovered through the new Mahindras in the recent past. Anand and the senior leaders said, is that so? They never rejected this, that this is some New York-based branding company trying to put it into some branding language which is not real. They had the childlike curiosity to welcome the ideas of these people and say, why don't we use this to in fact transform the entire organization, saying this already exists inside the company. How do we build on that? Second, self-awareness. They were very mindful of the fact that although Mahindra had done exceptionally well in the previous few years and had raised its game, there was a great self-awareness that it truly needed to understand much more about how to be a global company. Even though it had acquired a significant Korean company in Sanyong, they knew that it was not easy for them to operate globally till they mastered this whole aspect of what is the DNA of becoming a global company. So there was great self-awareness. They were also aware that the typical engineer's mindset in which they had, for example, won the Deming Prize amongst a few companies in the country to win the Deming Prize for business excellence, they understood that they had a very strong problem-solving culture and continuous improvement embedded. But they also understood this kind of mental agility of being analytical, looking at cause and effect relationship had to be complemented with the creative ability of asking themselves and sourcing through empathy and through creativity the designer's thinking of using the full power of the mind and thereby displaying mental agility. And because this is what they did, they began to talk a new language which they called 10x thinking, saying instead of talking about simply incremental growth, they began to say, why not this? What if this were to happen? The whole conversation which they described through three behaviors, they called it the practice of mindfulness. They called it the practice of the whole mind. They called the practice of learning from failures. And they talked about being leaders becoming multipliers. So they really developed this whole new language. And they also demonstrated they were willing to learn from new cultures, new people. When their studies found that some parts of the organization was different from the others. For example, Tech Mahindra was running pretty much as an independent company. But there they said, for the first time, when we facilitated a process of helping them to redesign all their people processes, for the first time, the auto people, the resorts people, finance people, and people from the tech sector were sitting together and learning from one another. They began to learn from people who were not like themselves. And they demonstrated typical amount of people agility to, for example, the earlier feeling was the tech sector said we are very different. What can we learn from the auto sector and the other way around? But for the first time, people demonstrated people agility to say, if this can be done in the factory, in the shop floor of Mahindra in Kandivali plant, for example, or in the Nasik plant, how can the tech people who are running their software and project management and that, how can they learn from the automotive sector, for instance? And what we found is as Mahindra began to challenge themselves to adopt the spirit of RISE, they were careful not to make it into one more management program with clear accountability for everybody of measures and trying to hold people accountable. On the other hand, they adapted themselves to a new way by saying, let's use the spirit of RISE to empower people and to make them raise their game. And what they said was that since the whole focus is coming from the thinking of driving positive change, even if they had to take tough calls, like in the last 18 months, because of some significant problems and challenges because of COVID, and with the new CEO who replaced Anand Mahindra a few months back, you know, Anish Shah, who came with the GE background. He's a young guy. He had a PhD from Carnegie Mellon and an IIM Ahmedabad degree. Had worked globally, and now here was a new leader inducted several years before the actual transition happened. That Anish was encouraged to say, become highly people oriented like the Mahindra Group is, but at the same time keep your sharp business acumen that you have learned through your global experience with GE, and ask new questions. Be more resourceful. And here is what the company did when it had to take a tough call. Instead of keeping on spending more money on the Korean company, they decided to let go of this business, and instead of continuously allowing it to bleed. So these are all examples on how they really learned from the failure of having invested in a Korean company and losing a lot of money, learning from the power of that and saying how can they learn from that and leverage that in the rest of the organization through experimentation, developing the resilience. And when we are, for example, letting go of people, which is something we had never done in the past because we are letting go of a business, it was done with compassion and integrity so that everybody who is also going through a difficult experience feels as if something very fair has happened inside the organization. So I want to take a pause and stop here for a moment and go into some of the finer details. And Asarela, are you ready to just ask the audience from a feedback on how relevant these examples are that we are giving, and is there any change they would like in that, and can we just take a pause and ask people about that?
Yes. A few more seconds before I close the poll. All right, so we have 92% who find it relevant and interesting, and the rest would appreciate more examples.
Okay. All right, thank you. So let me give a very specific example of childlike curiosity to learn. Some of you may have heard about the example of ethnography. Ethnography is something which is learned from anthropology and applied to marketing and customer and even employee experience, which is how can you observe people in their natural habitat? For example, when Mahindra was doing an employee survey based on the Gallup model, we began to talk to Prince saying you are applying the same model to your factory shop floor workers, for example, in your auto business. How do you know that these are the things that are truly important to your workers for their benefit? Why not ask new questions like a child would do to say what is truly important to you? So in fact, for the first time, they decided not to go with the standard employee engagement survey of Gallup, but developed a whole new approach by studying people in their natural habitat. For example, when the people from Mahindra traveled with workers to say how do they come from work to their factory, when they have to walk, they have to bicycle, they have to take a local train in that heat, what happens to them that 2-hour journey from their home to arrive at the factory? What really is important to these people when they come to work after that 2-hour early morning journey to come to the factory? There were some fascinating new insights when they decided to observe and learn from employees in their natural habitat. Where do my employees live? What happens to them when they actually come to work? What are the issues that are bothering them when they are returning home for work? When they began to ask such kind of questions, they had completely new insights because they were asking questions and they developed a whole new approach to study. In fact, Prince Augustine said, I will do my PhD based on this research. So it's quite exceptional that not only were they amenable to our suggestion that they can examine from first principle method what is important to their people, but they actually followed it up, did the research, found new ways to learn, and thereby transform the employee experience. Similarly, the honest feedback. You see, many companies do 360-degree feedback, but they do not have a culture of learning from the 360 feedback, getting people to sit together and have a dialogue on what they have learned from their 360 feedback. When people get more self-aware, when the organization does this study to say that all the leaders need to ask what is it that we are doing well and what is it that we need to do differently, there has to be some candid dialogue. When there are blue chip conferences that Anand is hosting of bringing the top 500 leaders from all over the world together, on one hand, we are celebrating the success of the company. On the other hand, we are having some candid dialogue on saying, what is it that we can do differently? You know, Mahindra invested in something very unique. They did something called the Mahindra Universe program, where the top leaders of Mahindra, along with their spouses, were taken to Harvard Business School, and they do that annually, in which even the spouses are encouraged to join the session. The conversation was, how can this help us? For example, earlier when we were giving them talks on the importance of mindfulness, it was having one impact, but when Mahindra and the spouses of the senior leaders, they all went to Harvard Business School and they attended a session on mindfulness in the age of distraction. They found a huge learning out of that, and they said the practice of mindfulness is the key to innovation. Let me give another example. For example, when we were working with Tata Steel many years back, Tata Steel understood that it had to find a way of getting more self-aware of the true talent of its people. When we suggested to them that they should look at the talent by looking at 4 dimensions: the capacity to think, capacity to relate, capacity to act, and capacity to learn. And when we introduced this whole model of talent to Tata Steel board and Tata Steel senior management, not only did Tata Steel adapt to it, they made it into a part of their talent management process, saying we will look at the potential of people based on this new way of thinking. Rather than measuring only how competent people are, let us begin to understand what their capacity is, because we brought it to their notice that human talent is the capacity with which we are born. To the extent we are given opportunities to develop, the potential and capacity is converted into actual competency and performance. To the extent that there is unrealized capacity, unfulfilled potential, that is the extent to which more opportunities can be given and more can be expected from people, as an example. So organizations which have this a culture of candor, a culture of learning from what they do exceptionally well and what they need to do to raise the game, they become much more self-aware, which is such an important part of that. And mental agility. You see, analytical intelligence is grossly overrated. It is necessary, it is important for problem solving, but it is grossly overrated unless it is supported with creative intelligence. You know, creativity is, we are all born with creativity when we are very young. In fact, when a study was done many years back on age and creativity, people above 60, they were found only 2% to be more creative. People between 50 to 60, also 2%. 40 to 50, also 2%. 30 to 42%, 20 to 32%. But when they dropped the age group and went to age 5, they found all children to be highly creative. That means between 5 and 15, we do something to our children to destroy their creativity. And organizations need to realize, all of us need to realize, that we can improve our creativity at any age. The key lies into overcoming fear. And there are 5 fears that reduce creativity: fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of ambiguity, fear of lack of time and resources, and fear of self-image being destroyed. These kinds of fears that people feel, and the only way to overcome these fears is to developing the mental agility to say it's okay to have a culture of experimentation and learning from failure. And that, I think Mahindra has done exceptionally well, that Tata Steel has done exceptionally well, that companies like Accenture, with whom we worked, who were our client when we helped them with their leadership development for their MDs, we found that Accenture has this whole new focus on total wellness, mindfulness, and learning from inner well-being, so that they were focusing on reducing stress and improving well-being and encouraging them to think more innovatively. No wonder that Accenture is a great example of a high-performance company. So people who consciously learn to experiment, reduce failure, reduce fear of failure, and learn from failure, they develop this inner capacity to truly pay attention and to become more agile learners. Similarly, people agility. You see, most of us have this problem that we tend to hang around with people who are more like us. So even socially and otherwise, we seem to interact with people who are more like us. But consciously, organizations, when they truly value inclusion and diversity, not only having more women in leadership positions, but diversity in terms of different capacities. In a team, somebody may be very good in visualization, somebody may be very good with language, somebody may be very good in dealing with people, somebody may be very good in the mathematical ability. Now, when teams value people who are not like themselves, and when the design of teams is done based on diversity and inclusion, magic begins to happen. For example, when I'm on the board of advisory board of Schneider Electric, a global company, 10 years back, they decided that they will put a lot more focus on gender in leadership positions. At that time, a small percentage of their senior leadership team was made of women, and they consciously decided to get more capable women leaders. Today, Schneider Electric, being an engineering company in the energy business, has a disproportionate large number of women at the top, and it has completely transformed its culture. Therefore, it has outperformed its peers very, very significantly. So this ability to deliberately build diversity and inclusion into the program is such an important part. On adaptability, how comfortable are we with change? For example, in many of these global companies that truly value this whole culture of learning through innovation, we have found there is a regular aspect of moving people out of their comfort zone into new assignments, new cultures, new locations, new roles, new responsibilities, new teams. And if it's not possible for you to do two changes that often, you are made part of project teams that are working on new initiatives so that you can learn and adapt to new aspects regularly. You see, here is an example of adaptability. For example, when Royal Enfield motorcycle was taken over by Eicher, and it was an absolutely sick company, the first several years of Eicher's focus on Enfield India was focused on fixing the problems of getting the plants to of a certain capacity, make them develop simple processes in statistical process control and quality so that they begin to offer predictable quality. So the motorcycle does not leak, it does not have the quality problems that it had, because everybody liked motorcycle of Enfield, but they did not like the bullet for its quality problems. So 10 years of the journey in that company was spent on fixing all these problems and transforming the culture of a very old company into new ways of doing things. And then with new leadership in place, new thinking in place, Enfield began to practice what they could learn from the finest designers in Italy to Europe, to what could they learn from the story that Harley Davidson had developed almost like a cult brand in terms of loyalty of the brand, and the customers enjoying even the clothing that was branded with Harley Davidson. I think Enfield India did the same thing. They quickly adapted to the new modern company in which the brand was more important than just the product. And so they converted the motorcycle into almost a cult following by creating user groups, taking them out for motorbiking trips to Leh and Ladakh and other places in the country, and encouraging that fun-like spirit around an old company which had become a sick company. So there was a whole thing about adapting to the new culture, developing a whole new experience, which is what Mahindra Group has also been doing consistently. Great example of adaptability. And finally, the resourcefulness, which is seen through what we call results agility or results orientation. is that no matter what challenging position do you have, no matter what difficulties you face. For example, I'll give an example of Indus Towers, the world's largest telecom company with whom we have worked continuously since their inception. You know, Indus Towers merged with Bharti Infratel, and they had to revisit their purpose and vision and values that this organization had done. And when the whole COVID lockdown happened, there was a huge demand on telecom sector to make sure that there was a continuous, reliability of the products and services, make sure that the digital interfaces were working well, make sure that customers were given all help, make sure that the organization that was shifting from the office to work from home, they were given very reliable solution by Airtel and by Vodafone and others who were sitting on the infrastructure created by Indus Towers. Now, Indus Towers got all its employees together, including people from Bharti Infratel, and they said, even though we are going through the biggest crisis, and we were helping them to do this large-scale process of getting all employees together in the new merged company to adopt the new culture, which was aligned together to serving customers in this wonderful way. The company was the first telecom company in the world to win the Deming Prize. And this organization said that even though COVID is playing havoc, that our employees cannot even visit the 120,000 sites where our towers are working to provide 99.99% reliability and 24/7 service. They took the responsibility, and the way they helped each other to handle the resourcefulness and develop that resilience. For example, one story that really touched me of Bala, who was this person from their Chennai circle who came to Gurgaon for some business, for staying in the guest house, and because of COVID, he completely got locked there, couldn't go back to his family. And meanwhile, he got COVID. And here is another colleague, another Tamilian colleague. He and his wife, a guy called Iyer and his wife, every day they cooked good Tamilian Brahmin food. And every day the company arranged for that food to be delivered hot and fresh from Delhi to Gurgaon in the guest house to Bala, who was staying there, to really demonstrate that, he is taking responsibility for the results. He's making sure that the company is running 24/7 in his circle, even though he's not physically present there. Now, how do we overcome the challenges of extreme COVID when you are losing near and dear ones, when your anxiety levels are high, and yet you find the resourcefulness within you? That is because there is a larger purpose that gives you that resilience. The final results orientation comes because you genuinely love the work and you enjoy each other. And therefore, that's the last thing I wish to state. I wish to narrate a story. One of the finest stories I was part of working with the Taj Group of Hotels. You see, we were helping the board of Taj Group of Hotels with their succession planning and leadership development process. And the story, goes back to 2008 when the terrorists entered Mumbai. And, I sent a message to the MD, Raymond Vixen. Raymond, how are you and the team? The terrorists were inside the Taj Hotel. And Raymond said, Anil, please pray for us. Then on television, I saw the sign that the Unilever global team was inside the hotel for their conference, and they were also surrounded by terrorists. So I sent a message to Nitin Paranspe, the chairman of Levers, who was also a client. And he and Leena Nair, who's now the global head of HR, she was also there. And both said to me, Anil, please pray for us. So all night I was sending messages to my friends all over the world to pray for the people in Mumbai. And early morning, I took a flight and went to Mumbai and joined the leadership team of the Taj, which was now operating out of President Hotel. These are the people who were not present inside the hotel, but the others, like the head of HR, HN Srinivas, and others who were in the President Hotel. And I joined them, and I was trying to see how can we help them to handle this challenge. What can we do together? Then, a few hours into the morning, the news came that Karamveer Kang, the general manager's wife and children, had been killed by the terrorists. They were staying in the Taj Hotel. And HN Srinivas, the HR head, turned to me and said, Anil, will you please tell your sister in Chandigarh to go to the parents of Karambir who live in Chandigarh, and his father was a retired general, to go and tell them about this loss before the television breaks the news. In any case, that evening at Wellington, Crescent, which is the guest house of the Taj in Kulaba, I met Karambir and his parents. And I and my colleague Shailendra Kumar, our board member, we entered that guest house where they were staying. Now, what do you tell somebody who's just lost his children and wife, right? But I just gave him a hug and sat down, and there was complete silence. And after a few minutes, his mother spoke. She said, Anil, do you know what happened that day when yesterday when Karambir was in the hotel when the terrorists came? He called me and said, Ma, one part of me wants to run to the old wing of the Taj where my wife and children are staying. But the other part says, I am the son of a soldier. I am with my colleagues in the lobby of the hotel facing the situation. How can I leave my own colleagues and run after my own family? And he said, Ma, I hope God will forgive me for making this choice. What an experience. Then we went to President Hotel and we met the guests who were being evacuated from the Taj. And many of them talked about Thomas Verghese, the chief steward of the restaurant, how Thomas Verghese and his colleagues formed a human chain around all the guests to protect them, helped all the guests to escape. Then Thomas helped all his colleagues to escape. When he was unfortunately the last man trying to leave the restaurant, he was shot dead. So next day, Mr. Ratan Tata and Mr. Krishna Kumar, the vice chairman of Taj, met Mrs. Thomas Verghese and said, Ma'am, we didn't know that your husband was such a courageous person. And she said, Sir, even I didn't know that he was courageous. All I know is that he loved the Taj and he loved the people there. So that night, before I went to bed, I realized the power of the words of my spiritual teacher who had told us, people who have this extreme power to rise over any challenges and take responsibility for outcomes, who show extraordinary resourcefulness, they are the people because they rise in love. They believe in the larger purpose of the organization. And when you rise in love, you don't fall in love, you rise in love, you discover extraordinary talent in yourself. That finally is the key. The power of the purpose of organizations, the power of the values of the organization, and our ability to rise in love. So I would say, finally, that is the core of everything that we talk about in learning agility. If you are really inspired by higher purpose, it will give you the capacity to have that childlike curiosity. It will give you the capacity to have self-awareness. It will make you mentally agile and be more creative and not analytical. It will make you deal with people who are not like yourself. It will make you adapt to the situation. And it will make you rise and become resourceful, so you take responsibility for ensuring the organization does its best. So this is a summary of the experience I wanted to share. I'll be very happy to now take questions in the last 10 minutes of this webinar.
All right. Thank you, sir. So we do have some questions.
Yes.
All right. So tech has become a part of learning. What role do you think it will play in manifesting learning agility?
Yeah, technology is a means to do that. So for example, when we create a digital platform in which every interface can be made much, much smoother. Earlier, if we had to come to know, for example, when we are running a poll now with you, we are able to understand what kind of things you are responsible for, what you are doing. What technology is doing is becoming very, very powerful enabler. And technology is also helping us to understand our stakeholders much better. Every time you show one kind of a behavior and a preference, technology captures that to know what do you care about. And once we know what you care about, we can give you the kind of products and services that make it better. So there, from a learning point of view, the whole objective of learning is so that finally we transform customer experience and employee experience and our stakeholder experience. And when we observe our stakeholders, when we learn from them, when we use the power of analytics And when we use the whole power of using the powerful technology that tells us to use artificial intelligence and the algorithms through deep learning, we can truly understand much better our stakeholders, and thereby we can make sure that we give off our best to their needs. So that's how this is becoming much better.
Okay. Um, E-learning became a must with the pandemic. How can we ensure high effectiveness in remote setting?
There are three things I would say, because since we are also an educational institution and we are running our MBA program with focus on design and inspired leadership, there are three things we have learned. One, you have to spend a lot more time in consciously thinking about how can digital learning be made more engaging, whether it is synchronous or asynchronous. That means a more conscious effort has to be put to make the learning environment fun. For example, we just finished in our school with all our colleagues something called the Festival of Appreciative Inquiry and Rejoicing. We call that FAIR, where we interview each other to understand when were we at our best in overcoming this crisis and how can we leverage our strengths. Now, in that process, we had on Zoom in breakout rooms people coming out with creative expression on dreaming about how to leverage our strengths. And in that, people used music, they used painting, they used singing, they used art form. So the whole process became far more engaging. So when we facilitate such interaction and we facilitate digital learning, we have to consciously, even though it is digital, we have to consciously pay more attention to getting people involved and their emotions to be invoked through creative methodology. That's one. Two, we have to make shorter sessions. We cannot run long sessions because people get exhausted by looking at screens. And we have to encourage people to have the right atmosphere, take conscious breaks, make sure they are not too attached to their screens, make sure the fatigue level doesn't go up, and consciously look. Like I am looking while talking to you, I'm looking at the screen partly, and partly I'm looking at the beautiful trees in the campus outside. I can see those. So I am alternately looking at the screen and the trees, looking at greenery, looking at natural vegetation, even in our small home at home. At home, if we keep a beautiful plant, and we alternate between looking at that and then consciously getting up and walking every few minutes and consciously having the right amount of sleep and eating the right kind of food. When we do all these things, the learning can become truly engaging and we can have the focus on well-being even though we are learning. So I think if both are done together, it is wonderful.
Okay, so okay, how do we facilitate learning agility for new joiners in this new hybrid work model, and how to align the learning with companies' values?
Yes. So when we do digital onboarding process, we have to consciously create opportunities for the new people to interact not just with the team that they are part of, but consciously being exposed to the entire culture of the organization by people who are working today, taking responsibility of having an informal dialogue digitally with them, in sharing the stories, in inviting them into their own personal context, in inquiring about their families, in encouraging even their families to appear on the screen so that we get to know their context and they get to know our context. So this has to be well planned. We have to create forums. For example, in our organization, every Tuesday and Friday, the entire organization has a team huddle. And we encourage people to share something from their personal context before they describe their professional context. And whether, we were praying together for each other when the COVID was striking many of us, or the help we were giving to each other by looking at hospital beds and oxygen and such things, but also the small acts of kindness that we were encouraging, and including our students ran something called the kindness challenge, which is something we encourage people to do more good in the world by serving people, whether it's the migrant labor that was going, or it was the people who did not have enough food. So when we collectively do more such things together and welcome people and consciously take time, now this takes us every Tuesday and Friday, we spend 30 minutes each in a team huddle on this kind of an activity. So this 1 hour a week with the entire team coming together is a beautiful expression of who we are. So organizations which are doing that, I remember a few months back, I was interviewing Harsh Mariwala for our digital channel. He is the founder and chairman of Marico. And he told me, Anil, thanks very much. This has been a very enjoyable conversation, but now it's time. It's, it's 7:30 and 6:30 to 7:30 was my conversation. I need to now rush back because all the employees of Marico, we are having a cookout digitally. That means people are cooking something and sharing dishes and showing to each other. And this is a fun activity that we have done. So these kinds of beautiful things that we can do to bring people together to understand who you are and your culture, you have to make conscious efforts to do that, for which we have to not just create formal reviews and meetings on digital, but we have to do the fun part and togetherness part and community part and open house part using digital. Then people can be brought on board.
Right. I think we have a final question now. Since this is from Vignesh, since we are from the health service sector, kindly give us some ideas to where we need to start this.
You see, I have a close association. I've been advising the Narayana Hospital. So Dr. Viren Shetty, who's the Chief Operating Officer, and also, Dr. Rupert, who's the Managing Director. I've been working closely with them in the last 2 years, right through the pandemic. I think what we need to do in the health sector is to really use alternate thinking to transform our patient experience. For example, Narayana and other leading hospitals decided how to make the environment of welcoming people, the patients, when they come in person, because it is necessary when they have to come to the hospital. How can we make the environment a lot more beautiful, aesthetically, emotionally for people? How do you speak to the patient and their near and dear ones so that you transform that experience? I think when you teach our people to use alternate thinking so that the entire patient experience is made, even in a life-threatening situation, people become more calm, and you have the capacity to teach your employees to listen to their near and dear ones without appearing under stress yourself. That means healthcare companies need to treat their own employees with extreme compassion and care so that they can treat patients like that. And this is what Narayana did. It did some extraordinary effort to make every employee feel safe and every employee feel special. And I think by doing that, they were able to transform the patient experience, not just through digital appointments and digital payments, so that even you don't have to go to a pay desk to pay your fees. You don't have to book an appointment by physically going somewhere, but not only adopting digital tools and technology and using that, but also in the interface between the nurse, the doctor, the technician, and patients, whether through video or in person. It is building that personal touch of compassion and care into every single experience. When you do that, people become truly responsible. And when you create a forum in which they can share these kinds of stories with each other, and Narayana has been doing many such things in the recent past to make that happen. Earlier, I was on the board of Max Healthcare. I was a trustee of the hospital in Sachdev in Delhi. And there again, Max had started doing this whole experience with the help of some former colleagues of mine to actually study every patient experience with the hospital and making employees aware of how their actions were impacting that. If you do that, the people become far more agile. That's what this is
Thank you, sir. I think we'll close the Q&A for now. Thank you, sir, on behalf of Adrenalin for taking the time out to talk to us through the dimensions of learning agility. Beautifully explained with examples and also for answering queries with use case scenarios. Thank you, sir, for that. Dear attendees, I hope you found this session useful and I hope you can carry some of it back to your organizations. Thank you for being an amazing audience. And please watch out for more thought leadership webinars powered by Adrenalin. Thank you, stay safe, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please stay safe and look after yourself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.